that will close this year. Well, that's based on the annual numbers in times past and taking in consideration all the additional factors that are working against church growth today, and the numbers that have already come in. The estimation that before the end of the year will be over 15,000 churches. Many of them are denominational churches, and we can see that. I know in Atlanta that some of the more traditional older denominations are selling their properties. They're selling their properties because their churches are consolidating, because they have buildings but no people. Um, and so that's a problem they had because of their good stewardship. So all these years they've been stewarding their resources well, in that they've accumulated all of this real estate, but at the same time, they were not converting and bringing in new people. And so they ended up in a situation where their membership was dying or is dying, but they're sitting on all of this real estate. And so do we keep all of these churches operational and they're empty? Or do we start selling some of them off, allowing the churches to consolidate, and that generates cash flow? Because you don't have people, there's no income coming in. So you don't have new money coming in, but you're sitting on old money because you've used the old money to buy real estate. Um, but that's the more traditional established denominations, because many times those denominations, individual churches didn't own their building. The denomination did. That's contrast with Church of God in Christ. The national church has somewhat of a legal right, but the national church don't buy our churches. Our local assemblies are responsible for purchasing churches. But in the more established traditional denominations, that denomination, they buy the buildings. They own the building. So if that congregation decides we don't want to be a part of this anymore, they don't take the church. They have to leave because the church belongs to the denomination. And so that's the situation they found themselves in. We're, on the other hand, are in a different situation because, again, most of our churches are owned by the local assembly and not the national church. So we have those who have buildings, and many times those buildings get sold, and there's really no accountability for the resources that come from the sale of those buildings. So sometimes that ended up being back compensation for what the pastors didn't get when they were pastor. Uh, so we end up with fewer real estate that's owned by the umbrella of the church, as our membership is really not increasing. Um, so um, um, when you talk about increase in denominational membership, that's different from local assembly membership. For example, all of us are we're Kojic pastors. So if 5 of my members leave my church and go to your church, you just experience local church growth. But those people were Kojic before they got to you. So that's no addition to the denomination. That's an addition to your assembly. And when you look at what's really going on in our denomination, are we having church growth because we're bringing people in, or are local churches growing because people are moving? So somebody who was Kojic in Detroit relocates to Atlanta, joins Pastor G's church. His church just grew, but the national church, the organization, denomination did not. If you got $5 and I got $5, Together we got $10. If I take your 5, together we still got $10. I got all the 10. You don't have any. But together we still have 10. So my mindset is, as we're looking at our local church growth, to ensure that all of our growth is not from reshuffling. Now you don't deny people membership because they're already in the church or they're coming from somebody else's church. But I'm saying, as pastors, we have to evaluate our growth and see where our growth is coming from. That's why evangelism is so important, because when you get new converts, not only do you have additions to the denomination, you got additions to the kingdom. So when somebody comes into your church through conversion, the kingdom just expanded and the denomination expanded. That's real church growth. So we want to make sure that a significant part of our local assemblies church growth is actual conversion, wherein the kingdom is expanding and the denomination is expanding. And because we're Pentecostal, that there are individuals that will come to our churches who are in the kingdom, but they had not experienced the fullness of the Spirit. So they had not experienced the Pentecostal experience. So they were saved, but they had not experienced Pentecostal experience. So they were already in the kingdom, but they were not under the umbrella of Pentecostalism. So now the kingdom didn't expand. Our denomination expanded, because that's someone who was saved in another organization, another fellowship, Reformation. They've now come in. That our denomination has increased, and the local assembly has increased. You see, so that's another type of way in which our denomination can grow. They grow either from new conversion or individuals that we introduce to the Pentecostal experience. That makes sense. So really, the lifeblood of your churches is really going to be those people. That's where you're going to get your most loyal members, not from folk who switch churches. Not for somebody who got upset with Bishop Merritt and said, I'm leaving his church and I'm coming over to Pastor G. I mean, that's an additional member, but their sense of loyalty is different. Because just like they left Bishop, as soon as you get upset them, they're going to leave you too. But when you brought them in by way of the altar in conversion, there is a level of loyalty that you won't get from people just switching churches. When you've introduced them to the Pentecostal experience, there is a sense of loyalty that you will have that you won't get from somebody who just switched churches. Because you then at that point become a spiritual father figure rather than the man who preaches to me every Sunday.
Thank you for what you're saying, right? So I had this thought this morning because I have been recently, well, for this year, traveling different churches. I've been recently, this year, as the regional evangelist president, traveling to the presidents' churches and to other churches in our region, right? And honestly, we need a church plant 101. Because what I found out is, because the question is, well, how come our churches aren't growing, right? Why aren't people coming? And it's not because, it cannot be because folk don't want salvation. That's because that goes against Scripture, right? And so why do they not come? Well, what I found out and what I've been seeing is, for a lot of pastors are not even prepared for people to come. That's the first thing. Because our churches are not clean. I cannot tell you how many churches I've been in, and I've told Pastor, man, you need to clean this church up. It's not clean. And why do we think people will come to a church that's not clean? Now, most church plants begin with renting, right? And so you have to almost measure out how much you're going to do. You know, I've seen pastors go in the rented building and do all this expensive renovation, but it's not your building. But paint is cheap, you know. Cleaning supplies are inexpensive. Uh, we, and then put a sign outside your church. This is church plant 101. How do people are going to know that your church is there if you don't have a sign outside the door? And then once they get in there, start on time. If your services say they're going to start at 10 and you don't start to 10:20, that's church plant 101. Even if it's just you and your family. And this is, I'm telling you, it was just me and my family most sometimes. Me and my wife and my kid. But we always started on time. We were renting a event center. On Saturday night, they would have events. So, and they wouldn't clean. So on Sunday mornings, we'd have to get there early, clean the tables, sweep the floor, do all this stuff. Now, my wife was pregnant at the time too, but she was pregnant with one, and I had one in the stroller. But we'd be in there moving chairs, mopping the floor, because we didn't want the saints to come to a dirty church. And I'm shocked. I am absolutely shocked at how many pastors, quote unquote, we have, if they're even in rented buildings, and your churches are there. And I mean, not even clean. And so we need. So and it's not that people don't want to hear your message, but they don't want to sit in your dirty church. They don't want to go to a church where there's no good signage. Um, they'll say, "Well, I need a musician." Well, even if you had one, there's some basic things we need to have in place. I'm not even talking about the business stuff. I'm talking about just basic church plant 101 to make your ministry, your delivery inviting. And it's just really shocking to me how that the basic things we're not doing as congregants and as pastors.
I think, Superintendent, that many times because many of our pastors think because we got glory and power that those other things don't matter as much. And so people are going to come to our church because there's so much glory and power that's here. And they don't think those other things are significant. But you know those things. But for many of them, nobody has ever been there to teach them that these things are just as important when it comes to growing your ministry. I actually have had discussion with our church growth department for our denomination and shared with them that I think there is a specific need for church plant information to be given, because growing an existing church is different from planning a ministry, and there are things that you need to know and you need to be aware of as a church planner that may not be needed for somebody who's taking over a ministry that already existed, because most of our church growth information that's disseminated to our pastors is really focused to individuals who are pastoring existing churches. So these ministries already existed, and you're trying to grow them versus starting from ground up. And the thing of that I need this facility, whatever I've got, whatever I'm having service in, it needs to be clean. Bathrooms need to be functional. We need to start on time. There needs to be structure to the service. All of these things, where it's located, all of these things that end up mattering. But because, again, nobody is there to teach them and share that information, people are just doing whatever they think is best versus what actually worked. When I was getting ready to plant the church after I'd accepted the call to plant here, I made an investment and I went to Ivy Hilliard's Church Planners Conference And I debated about it because, I mean, that's 16 years ago, because they wanted $2,500 for a week of classes. I thought that was too much. I said, do I want to spend $2,500 for a week of classes? And I gave in, and I went. That was the best $2,500 I've ever spent as it relates to my church. The money that conference that week saved me from mistakes I avoided, the information that he gave me and was given to those who attended, after the first day, it was worth the $2,500. That man literally brought all of their documents from their church, everything, put it in a binder and gave it to us, and then said, whatever you find in here you want to use it, put your name on it and take mine off. And don't call my office and asking, is it all right? I ain't never seen that before, experienced it, because many times pastors find out something that worked and they hold it as their secret. And sometimes we're not as anxious to share the wisdom and experience that we have. But this man literally put everything in a binder, had all of his leadership staff come in, and they were teaching classes during that week. It was an amazing experience. But again, it made the world of difference. I mean, it was all practical. So none of the presentations were pie in the sky and a whole lot of theoretical stuff. No, it was do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this, everything. How to put a funeral together, just everything that a pastor starting off would want to know. He literally gave formats, and literally how to choose the name of your church, where you want to, where the things you should look at when it comes to location, investment. If you're leasing a building, you don't want to put too much investment in it because eventually you're going to walk away from it. And you've made the landlord richer because you've improved his investment. But at the end of the day, you walk away with nothing. Landlord's not going to write you a check at the end and say you were good to my building here. No. The lease is going to be up. You're going to have to move on. And so all of just practical things, how to get your finances in line. You're just starting, you're just planning, but how to get your church finances in place so when it's time to purchase, you're ready. All of that information they gave us in that week. And so it's needed, but unfortunately, many times, Superintendent, that information is not given, and we're not given that information. And many times we end up, when we start a ministry, we start a ministry that's similar to the ministry we grew up in. This is how we did it at the church I grew up in. So this is how I'm going to do it at the church I'm now planning. And to realize that what worked then does not necessarily work now. Because we've all experienced things that how they used to do things. Back then, that worked. But doing that today, it will not work. And so, not trying to pastor yesterday's church. We're pastoring in 2025, but there is a temptation to pastor the 1990, the 1980 church that we grew up in. That church doesn't exist any longer. So if you're trying to pastor that church, your church not going to grow. Those fish don't exist any longer. They're different fish that are swimming in the pond. If you want to catch those fish, you got to do differently than they did to catch us when we were in the pond. The fish today are different. They don't tolerate stuff that we tolerated. They don't respond to things we responded to. They don't put up with stuff we put up with. And so if you don't make the necessary adjustments, that you'll be doing what you think is the right thing and not seeing results, because again, you're trying to pastor a church that doesn't exist any longer. If this cultural climate wasn't enough, 2025 has moved us into a whole nother environment on top of what was already going on with what's going on in our government. And as pastors, you say, I don't want to be political. You don't have to be political. You don't have to be political in your pulpit. You don't have to bash anybody or promote anybody, but you also cannot be ignorant of what's going on because it directly affects us. The changes that are going on in the government, they directly affect us. When I say us, I mean we as pastors, because what affects our people affects us. So you got members who are working in jobs that are being eliminated or getting ready to be eliminated. They are strategically targeting occupations, jobs that have benefited our people. Our business owners, who many of them benefited from government contracts because the government had things in place to make sure that a percentage of your contracts were going to minority-owned companies. And many of our business owners benefited from those. Well, guess what? Those no longer exist. So those contracts that they would have gotten or they had gotten, they won't be getting them anymore. Because the only reason many of them were extending those contracts to black-owned, minority-owned businesses, because the government was forcing them. But now when the government says you can give them to whoever you want, guess who they're going to give it to? Their buddies, their family members, people they golf with, the people in their neighborhood. And guess what? Those people tend to... So all of these things are happening that are affecting our people and will continue to affect our people. That's going to affect our churches. And I say all of that as we close out this year, getting ready to go into a new year, consider that as you budget. I'm not saying let's expect doom. I'm not being pessimistic. I'm saying being cautious. We live by faith, but you do your budgets by reality. Hear that. You don't do budgets by faith. You do budgets by real numbers. You don't want no accountant doing your paperwork by faith. You don't want to be sending your tax forms in and say this is by faith. No, that's the actual. Those documents are based on actual numbers. When it comes to our budgets, we have to deal with actual numbers. As we believe God for more, as we stretch our faith, we do that. But when it comes to doing a budget, you do actual numbers. Consider the possibility of your income being cut. We think of income being cut, people leave the church, people die, people relocate. But what if they don't go anywhere? They didn't leave, their job did. So you want to make sure that you are in a position where if that loss occurred, your church can still survive and stay afloat. We started off today talking about the stress and the burden that we have to live under. Just imagine the additional stress that you would be under, knowing that you got a budget like this, but your income has dropped to this. As you have to still do all of the work of ministry, handle the stress of ministry, but you now have this financial burden that's hanging over you because your budget exceeds your income because of loss that happened that was beyond your control. We with who we have in leadership, we have no idea what's coming. God knows, but we don't. So if there is any time that we have to be wise, if any time that we needed to be sensitive to the Spirit and His leading, it's now. Because these days, you may have, I've never seen days like the days we're living in now. Soup, I saw your hand. Oh, yes.
I don't think guy who's occupying the White House, I don't think he's intending to leave when his term is up.
No.
He's setting this thing up where he can remain. Yeah, I don't believe he's intending to leave.
There's so much that's going on that we can see. I'm concerned about everything that's going on that we can't see. Whatever they're getting ready to do next, it's already planned. So we see what they've done, but what we don't see is what they're getting ready to do. This has been strategically rolled out. The 4 years he was out of office, they were planning for this. We saw in the news how everybody go down to Mar-a-Lago and they're meeting and everything. I mean, he's not even president, and they meeting with him like he was president. They were planning. They were planning from day one when he would re-enter the White House what they would do. They're not wasting any time. And we are targets. I mean, he never had an affinity for our people, but the fact that we were responsible for him losing in 2020, he is very angry at us now. And the group that was most responsible for him losing were black women. And guess what? In 3 months, they lost over 300,000 jobs just among black women. When he was cutting government jobs, that was directly attached to us. Because guess who worked those government jobs? A lot of folk who look like us. That was all on purpose.
I was one of them. No longer a federal employee.
So again, this is not to be pessimistic. This is for us to deal with reality. And there will come times when some things you're going to have to address in your pulpit as pastor. Because if your membership is dealing with that, everybody hears it and see it in the news, and then you stand up and preach about Daniel in the lion's den, and everybody in the audience mind is on what's going on, and you talking about Daniel, then that says to them that you're completely out of touch. We're called to preach the gospel, so I can't get up in my pulpit and preach Trump for an hour, because that's not the gospel. But as a pastor, as a shepherd, I have to address what my people and what this country and the world are dealing with. Otherwise, I'm out of touch. It's like walking in your sanctuary and there's a big elephant sitting in the middle of the sanctuary. And you standing up there like it's just regular service. Come on, saints, get your praise on. It's like, do you not see this elephant sitting up in here? That is how the saints look at us when we don't address the elephants in the room and the things that are going on in their world, in this country. And so you have to address it. Again, that doesn't mean preach on it. That's your whole message. But you're going to have to address some issues. You're going to have to take a stand on something. Because they are. Our counterparts, they are. For 8 years, they preached on Obama. Made him seem like he was the Antichrist. And so, again, you can't be out of touch or appear that you're not in touch with reality.
Isn't that, again, that goes back to Church Plant 101, right? That goes back to, equipping church planners with these are the things you got to address, you got to talk about. You have to, and if you don't know how, and nowadays, honestly, if you don't know something, Google is your best friend. and then Google will even, the Google AI will even
Tell you what to say, how
what to
to
say,
it,
how
the
to
wo-
say, and
the
give you
words to
supporting
use.
documentation. So, as pastors, man, honestly, and this is just what I'm observing. We've gotten to be so lazy. We're so incredibly lazy, and then you want your church to grow by osmosis, but it doesn't. It doesn't. And so when your church doesn't grow, then your district doesn't grow. When your district don't grow, it affects the jurisdiction and the national church. Period. But we have to start, I think, at the basics. And one of the basics is pay attention to the news. And that don't mean, get so encumbered that you preach doom and gloom, but at least tie your message to have some type of current event tied to your message and tell your people basically how the Lord is going to rescue you or how to overcome this. But again, to me, honestly, Bishop Mary, that is church plant 101. And these are the things, because people want to go to churches where they feel like they're seen, they're heard, that you are aware as their pastor of what they got going on. And watch the news, and sometimes either we're going to pray about this that's going on in the city, we're going to, it's going to be part of my sermon text, not the whole thing, but at least tied in so that, because your members watch the news.
Right.
They do. Your members are aware of what's happening in the area that your church is, because a lot of them come from that area. So it's up to us as the pastor, the spiritual leader, to be in touch with what's going on in the congregation and in the city and in the nation. Church plant 101.
And so as Pentecostals, unfortunately, we have a history of being detached from the world. When you go back to the civil rights movement, that was pretty much led by Baptists. We were in Terry service. And we didn't have strong Pentecostal voices in the forefront of that movement. And many of them today still pretty much say that we were silent and absent. And with what's going on today, we can't afford to repeat that. I was at Morehouse for a celebration for MLK Preachers annual event where they were bringing in new preachers on the board. And a pastor stopped and said that I watched your response to the Charlie Kirk assassination. He said, I saw all of these Baptist responses and all of these other pastors' responses, and I was looking for a Pentecostal voice to address it. He said, I found one when I saw your response. People are looking for us to step up. Because again, we don't want to repeat what was done during the civil rights movement. We all are on our way to heaven. That is our hope. But in the meantime, we're in the earth. And Jesus said, pray that thy kingdom would come. So again, we cannot be again detached and unconcerned about what's going on in the world that we currently live in. Dr. Scott, I see your facial expressions. Said you.
It's mixed emotions from the perspective. It's mixed emotions from the perspective of being in predominantly white institutions that's basically all my life. And I recently had to deal with some of new followers who are now congregating with me in planting the church, is this whole Christian nationalism thing. For whatever reason, they're oblivious to it, what's going on. And so my job is to not only educate and inform, but to call it out for what it is. And so lately, that's what I had to do, is deal with that issue. And I was one that kind of shied away from it, because even when I pastor in the pulpit, I'm not using my pulpit for political gain, sexism, and all that other kind of stuff. But now I'm realizing I had to deal with this particular issue when it come down to Christian nationalism with some of my clear-eyed brothers, because they don't see it. And then just recently with one who mentored me, he exposed me to, he's a white guy, he exposed me to the reason why, I'm just say it. The reason why Brother Swagger started an inner city church is because I had a mixed choir at the school, but the only reason he started the inner city church was because there was too many black and brown people at the main church. So they only created that church to get all the black and brown people out of the main sanctuary and put them over at Goya Family Worship Center. So, again, my clear-eyed brothers are not seeing that, but now I'm having to educate them on that. So that's what my expression is. It's not that I don't agree with it. It's just that we do have to address that issue. And I had to address that issue recently with some of my colleagues, because it's just, and you'll never hear me get on there and endorse Charlie Kirk or whatever. I'm not. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to label him as some martyr that he's a hero either. But what I am going to do is address that issue, on what I know to be. So yes, we have some social issues that needs to be addressed, and I believe that as one who's pioneered church, I'm going to address those social issues, not from the perspective of being dogmatic, but from the perspective of you need to understand we need to deal with this so that we don't operate in ignorance.
It's our situation in the United States is very different from any other country. And you travel outside of the U.S., you'll see that it's extremely different. And it all goes back, our relationship all goes back, and when you go to the core of it, it all goes back to slavery. And even though it's been 200 years we're 200 years, almost 200 years post-slavery, still the remnants of it are still a part of the fabric of this nation. This nation was built for the benefit of white men. And they've always been in power and in control. And for them to establish a nation that is a democracy, meaning the majority rule, that was fine when they were a majority. But when they started seeing that their days of being in the majority were coming to a quick end, they're like, we need to change the rules. Because if we don't change the rules, we're not going to be a majority, and they're going to rule us. And God forbid, if they rule us, they're going to pay us back for what we did to them. True. And so that fear is causing what's going on right now. The fear that non-whites would be in the majority and would be in control, and what would happen as a result of them losing control. And so these shifts and changes they're making, it's about control. Removing all of the leaders out of the military that look like us, all of the people who were in high-ranked positions, they're either resigning or they're being fired. That there will be very few people in high places that look like us if they have their way. And so when it comes into the church, we'd like to believe. And even that, they're only going to let you get so high.
I want to add to that one other thing with this panel. Why I think this is a must. This panel that I just had to deal with recently, and it's so obvious that still blacks, we as a culture, as a people, we'll flock over to the white churches. When Jensen Franklin did all this, what he did, and we have so many blacks over there. And I said to the panel, it's easy for my people to go to your church, but can little Johnny and little Billy come to my church? I got just as much as education, I got everything else, but you guys still don't look at me as pastor, all right? Unless it's in the inner city and you label me and limit me to the inner city and say, oh, we go to an inner city church, but you do not still want to recognize me as a black pastor. There's a problem with that, but our people, we're still flocking to predominantly Caucasian churches, but the Caucasians are not flocking to our churches.
It all goes back to, again, this belief that whatever is white is supreme.
Right.
And so they were meant and created to be in control and to have power. And we are supposed to always be in submission to their power. So even when they pastor and they have all these black folk in their congregation, they let them sing, they let them dance and entertain them. But when you look at the elders board, the trustee board, the board of the church, guess what? None of us are sitting on it. We are for the purpose of their entertainment. That's why they don't mind you being a star rapper. They don't mind you being an actor or athlete, because your purpose is to entertain us. But when you step into a role that requires intellectual capacity, that's when they get really uncomfortable. They still have not gotten over a black man and a woman in the White House. And they were too smart and too clean. Everything that they thought we should be, they were not. And this man was the most powerful man in the world, and he was black. And they are still trying to get over that.
No 34 felonies. No 34 felonies.
He and his wife graduated from Ivy School.
So it's a matter of power, and it becomes difficult for us in the church world because our white brothers and sisters, in our mind, we don't want to think that they think like that too, but they do. But they do. They do. That's why his biggest support system is them. And he is nothing like Jesus. He has none of the characteristics of Jesus. He displays none of Jesus' teaching. But in their eyes, he's the mini Messiah. As they see what's being done to their brothers, their black brothers and sisters, they still support him and support him even more. But this is our reality. This is the conditions that we now pastor in, and these are the conditions we must get the wisdom to win in. That as horrible as the conditions are, there is a way for us yet to win.
Not to cut you off, I was talking with a brother that looked like you and I, and I'm just bluntly, looked like you and I. Me and him talking. White guy comes up. I'm not going to change the conversation. I'm just letting him know. His response was, obey your master. I said, well, who made the white man master? I said, if you read your Bible, you see Billy the Bible talking about black folk look like me and you. I didn't change for him. I just told him, you all are not better than blacks because of your ethnicity. You know, out of one blood, God made man. Acts tells us that, right? Out of one blood. So you're not better than me, I'm not better than you. But once again, obey your master. Who made the white man master? Where'd that come from? Solomon said, I'm black. Abraham, them guys were not Anglo, them guys were black.
They were Africans.
African, and was he black or what?
They were Africans.
They were African, and what they look like, me and you, right?
They were Africans.
They look like me and you.
Egypt is in Africa.
They were.
Thank you.
They were Africans.
Anthropologically proven that all races on earth stem from black people.
From Africa. It's,
Saying the mic, Reverend, we on live.
I was listening the other day, this lady named Jane Elliott. I don't know if you've heard of her. Yeah. She said the white folks got to come to the understanding there's only one race, and it's called the human race. She said when we can grasp that fact, she said because all of us, and she's white as white can be, she said my forefathers are black, and that's the way it is for everybody in the world. We moved to other places and we assimilated to the conditions of where we moved. But everybody started in Africa. Everybody started from a black woman. And that's what we need to realize that, because somehow we think we are second rate. We accept that second rate citizenship. We accept that fact that maybe we're not as good, but I'm as good as anyone. I'm not better. But in the truth, I am better because I have Christ. But
I'm better. I'm better. We created everything.
we created everything, but
They stole it.
that wasn't our ability. That was God's ability. God favored us. That's all it is God's favor. But when we go to thinking that we are better than everybody else, we just like them. They think they're better than everybody else. So you got two betters trying to better one another. And that will never work.
I'm going to have to disagree with him on part of that.
That's what makes
Because you're better.
Huh?
Because you're better.
But we don't walk around, portraying that we're better, right? But in contrast to what they're attempting to do, we are. How many of you know a federal person that worked for the feds that no longer work for them? If you don't, you do now, because one is talking to you. I got my last federal paycheck yesterday, right? So my income done went from 157, that's 157,000, not $150, down to just what I get as far as my VA disability and my Social Security disability of $72,000 a year now. So with regards to the church planting, before I was buying all of the cleaning supplies and paying the church rent, out of my tithe. I got to have a conversation with my church tomorrow, because we got somebody in the White House who's decided with your services, and I work for the VA. Right, I worked for them 19 years. Old enough to retire as far as my age, but didn't have the 25 years to retire. So what do we do with that? So now my budget is, so I've been going to the range every week, making sure I can, anyway, somebody take the mic.
You're online. You're online.
I'm online. Somebody take the mic. Somebody take the mic.
To the range.
I've been going to the range.
But,
I just zeroed my AR. Anyway. No,
Pastor,
sir, I'm not going to be, when they go low, I'm going into the gutter.
Pastor G just shared with us that he has already been affected by it. That one of the deceptive things that come out of what has taken place these last 10 months is that everybody gets to see it happening to somebody else, and there's this false security that is not coming your way. And the truth of the matter is, again, they are just getting started. And before they are done, we all will be affected by it in some way.
And Bishop Merritt, I'm angry. I want you to know I'm angry. Okay. I'm angry.
No, but
You help me get to that spot.
and that's all right. You just now have to manage it. Because the truth of the matter, anybody that's paying attention ought to be angry. I think every day something is happening that's making me angry. And now it becomes my responsibility to manage it, and also to figure out and allow the Holy Spirit to share with us how, again, we're going to get through this. And again, when. I don't just want to survive it, but I want to come out of this better. And that's going to require God. And like I shared with my congregation, that it was just 5 years ago we were in this place, the same place. We weren't dealing with somebody in the White House. We were dealing with a virus that we couldn't see, that had literally shut the country down, and we were all in a state the enemy trying to make us all get in a state of despair because there was no hope, no treatment, no vaccine. We were just surrounded by death every day. You couldn't turn the TV on without that number at the bottom of the screen telling you how many people had died. Everybody knew somebody. Everybody was getting phone calls and emails about somebody dying. That's where we were 5 years ago. It seemed like 50 years ago. But just remember how that felt, again, in the early stages when there's no treatment, no vaccine, not knowing when we were going to be free again. And here we are. We came through that. And for many, we came out better. And if God could do that through a pandemic, he can do that through Trump. That God can get us through it, and God can allow us to win. And we got to seek God, that God will give us the strategies and the wisdom that we can win through this as pastors, to teach our people how they can get through this, keeping the people out of despair. That is a challenge, but that's something that all of us are called to do. That we cannot allow the people that we lead and we pastor to fall into despair and to think that this is hopeless. That it's our responsibility to teach and preach hope to them and faith to them every chance we get. And know as we're preaching to them, we're preaching to ourselves. Because it's not like they're in it. We're all in it together. And there is a way to win. Don't ever forget that. In this climate, in your local churches, moving past the stage that you are to your next stage, there is a way to win. If you think that you've reached the ceiling, that better and more is out of your reach, that everybody else can get it but you, you're not going to make it. But you got to know and you got to realize that God can help you win. But to Superintendent's point, that we got to follow instructions. We can't win on our terms. There is a way to win. I got to tap into that way and follow the instructions. Sometimes we want to do our thing and expect God to bless it. No, we have to find his way. His way is the way he's going to bless. So all of us in our ministries, all of us with what's going on, we got to seek his way, because his way he will bless. Any other questions? I think it's almost time for us to come together. Pastor Moss, did I see your hand? No. Okay. Bless you, Bishop Wilson.
Somebody need to go tell mother they got it in her class.
Wait a minute, so I'm being volunteered?
I'm moderating.
Y'all know I love confrontation. Go get y'all.
These settings, and as we talked about earlier, it requires a commitment and sacrifice. All of us got a whole lot of things that we could be doing, need to be doing. If it's nothing but getting some rest, but we make the sacrifice to be here. I would say that we need to really try to encourage our other pastors to understand the benefit of this coming together among pastors. Among pastors.
And leaders in the
And
church, because I mean everybody here is not pastoring, but you certainly
Lead.
You lead in your local church.
and having a safe place, because some things that we may not be able to have the discussion among your members and your lay people, but the way that we can have those discussions among other pastors and leaders is extremely important. And I think our fellow pastors who are not taking advantage of this are doing themselves a disservice. Everybody's not in the same place. I was sharing with the pastors in my district. This is a difficult time for many. Many are working with limited resources. The struggles of ministry. And sometimes people think that if they don't have what is being asked for, or they can't do what somebody else is doing, that it's better that they just not show up and not do anything. And I pray that as we continue to move forward, that we can have a culture that people will feel safe, even if they are in a position where they can't do what's being asked. Because, the reality of it, you're trying to keep the lights on in your church and keep the water running and pay the rent, that sometimes you don't have the extra whatever that the jurisdiction is asking for. And that's all right. That's all right. But the last thing you want to do is isolate yourself, because there's very little victory in isolation. And so you can't afford to get off by yourself. That's where the enemy has his best conversations, when we are in isolation. And he can talk good. He's deceived the best.
And that's what we tell our members, our membership. You tell your members that. So if it's for them, it's for us too.
We're going to get it back to you, Pastor.
Go ahead. I just said that's what we tell our members. If you can't do whatever is asked, right, just still show up. Because what the enemy does is he tries to isolate you. And Bible says faith comes by hearing. And so the word of God that we preach is God's word, and it contains God's faith. So if the first thing the enemy does, it comes after your hearing. And if you can't hear faith, then you'll never, if you don't hear the word of faith, it'll never be deposited in the soul of your heart, and you'll never grow faith. And if the pastor ain't growing faith, then how in the world are the leaders the people in your church going to grow faith? So the same faith that you teach them, that's the same thing we got to do as relates to this leader. You got to show up, you got to be in place, because if we can't expect other people to follow us if we're not willing to follow, period. So if you don't have the money, just still come, because it's right to be in place, and that's across the board. And so I am personally, I'm screaming at our leaders at my church. Hey, listen, if you're a leader in the jurisdiction, you gotta be accountable. If you can't, we understand you can't be at everything, but you ought to be at most of the stuff, because or don't take the position. So.
Pastor Walker.
As a pastor that made the choice based on what I think God said to me to get started in the suburban area, these classes have been very helpful, because it's not like I'm in a very well-populated area. And so it's been helpful, especially I remember a few months ago when I was there, and I was saying, and I remember what you said, Superintendent, change your thinking. Don't just think small all the time. And it's not easy, because you're in a community where I've reached out to pastors in the community thinking I'm going to get help. And the responses I've gotten was shocking, but not shocking, and along racial lines. One pastor once said to me that, I got some new folk coming in my church and stuff, and, we don't think we need to be mixing and mingling. I said, okay. It's sad. It's real. And they will, like Dr. Scott said, we got no problem going over there. But when they come over here, I had one time a lady came to my church and brought her to church. And when she came in and looked and didn't see anything or anyone look like her, she'd rather go outside and sit in the hot car. What it was somebody was passing by and saw her pass out in the car. Came in to stop my service. They said, y'all know this lady? I said, yeah, we brought her to church. But you'd rather go and sit in the hot car because of her prejudice. So it's a real thing. This is not fairy tale. I'm talking about things I've experienced personal. I've invited people to my church and they're like, anybody like me go to your church? No, you be the first one. They didn't show up. It does happen. And so therefore, at the same time, you got to preach social justice, and I do. Sometimes my wife says I get off when they're too much, but I try to taper because I'm conscious of the things that's happening in the world. You know, I'm tuned in not just to Kirk Franklin and all the other gospel singing. I love all of that, but I've learned from a young age. My father taught me, be in tune with the current affairs, so you know what's happening around you, so you can be able to use wisdom to let people know you're in tune with what's happening, but at the same time, giving them the gospel like what Bishop said. And so by doing that, thank God we celebrated 13 years, still going. It's not what we, it's not where I want to be, but thank God we are still going. And even through the pandemic, we managed to survive, and God has blessed us. And so, start from one families to now, different families through the time, and we're still going. So I want to encourage any pastor who dreaming or daring to pastor, you can do it. No matter where you go, sometimes you got to go in the wilderness to make a highway in the desert. And so that's what God does. So I'm encouraged by coming to these gatherings, and sometimes I wish more pastors will come out because some people think they're not getting nothing out of it. One person said that to me one time. I said, you need to come on. All right, God bless.
Let's get